당연히 중에 타박담 타발라야 내가 그와 마세 슈차버지 고그래 라 다다진디 거기 장고 정어 집에 삼바디 샤로 송바 따라서 보더니 가담비 라마 샤라와 송바 나가세 생규의 체담 체신 카 야매와실에 미두나 코유 주군중 나 미대바다야 테라실에 명세 가라다 가르소레 카야음지 마주나 저 삼바디 세가라 너 중대 그 중에 삼바디 창라 창个카라 안에 삼바 매 남다와 나시체네 순주를 때부치지看了有啊，就定了没吧？看了怕人也没往心里没读呢。我当时可以就俺我说可以就贵重了呀，没得把带，是吧？到晚上听着心里明白，太大呢，我告诉你，都跟我比搞不样。我把都跟我比搞把，他把挺多年往也太单差，
No. So not only do we need to have renunciation, it's an absolute necessity, but it needs to be this really strong renunciation, a fierce kind of renunciation. And so as the great Lama Tsongkhapa, our protector, said himself about this attitude, it's just the way Sharawa, and this is one of the Kadampa masters, he described it like this. Suppose this attitude of renunciation is no stronger in your heart than a thin film of barley powder spread out on the surface of some homemade beer. So if you have just this really thin layer of this powder, and that's sort of the kind of strength of your attitude of renunciation, it doesn't go to the depths, it's not strong, and it's not really grounded, then you're feeling that you want to avoid the cause of the cycle of life, or the cause of cyclic existence, what we call the origin of all of this suffering, will be no stronger than that. So if you don't have this kind of attitude in your heart, then your desire, your aspiration to get out of that situation will be exactly the same. Your aspiration to reach nirvana, where you stop both suffering and its origin, will be exactly the same way, not strong at all.
我开上学那些钱，六点三百过年考完了线路，那么马些话看眼去了马街呢？我在中国人考了线，那么就他把腿一个落腿，咱们就做个人事。根据3百过呢，3百过呢，可以找我的来的你们把人把连你有人把的马些呢，找我700。俺就考了出来，那么一般，那么就那我他们就做个人事啊，菜单，可以就根据你们就到我菜单没做完噻。帮着都跟我妈先拿是，帮着都跟妹妹先拿，俺你太帮别搞半天，老把咱们做个人，前年那边全部都说完那些，太单呢，都跟帮别搞半样，他把挺多年半样，太单渣谁干了，帮着都跟帮别搞半样，俺来老把咱们就骂到，俺你都看上。过天参与把这姐妹都把人家在中国太单的都跟国别搞吧，他把挺多年话也太单渣，
So if you only have this sort of not a very strong feeling to get out of this cycle of suffering, if your wish if your renunciation is not strong, then your wish to practice the path will merely be words. So as it said in the great stages on the path by Je Lama Tsongkhapa, if you don't contemplate the suffering nature, then you won't give rise to get out of this. And if you don't contemplate the sort of origin of suffering, then you won't know the method by which you can get out of this kind of cycle of suffering. So if you don't have this kind of renunciation, then your aspiration to reach nirvana, this state which is beyond where you actually stop suffering and the origin of suffering, will be exactly the same way. It will be very flimsy and nothing but empty words.
Oh yeah, 当然东西那了没水平，也就没了。 是吧？在空头下话那些推他们做些，身边先靠着些产品，你懂我了？没随便人家样往上买了是，人家往上买了是，现在懂我见到我了，没随便人家买了。俺这前几天说，让他们养大把做不下去，他们这些，俺这让他们不下去个什么，马脚把养一个人一边手间没结完，下去个什么，白了马脚把一个人一边落手间没结完，俺这头发钱不养，俺这吃这咱们考咱们就话人喏，就话人喏，先送把大人。俺那抢救个什么就来叫完了，我都打什么东西拿完了，没什么人去过，再叫完了，让人都俺那东西了没得不跟我去叫过也，再叫完了，让人都家人俺就马见了，现在都公平，人家觉得没，呀。
So, if your own sense of renunciation, of wishing to abandon the suffering of samsara and its causes, is not very strong, then your practice will be nothing but empty words. And so, too, if you try to proceed to giving rise to compassion, if you haven't yet had this genuine, strong wish where you can't bear to be in these sufferings of samsara, if you haven't generated that in relation to yourself, then compassion, the state of mind where you can no longer bear to see other living beings wander through the cycle, there's no way that you will gain that. You won't be able to generate this attitude of bodhicitta, of wishing to achieve matchless or unsurpassed perfect enlightenment for all beings, this powerful wish that motivates you. So in that case, if you haven't contemplated renunciation on the basis of yourself, you can't apply this kind of understanding and see that others are in that same situation, such that you give rise to a genuine kind of bodhicitta. So the greater way becomes for you nothing but some flimsy understanding of the descriptions you find of it in books. So it continues here. The point is that to develop this wish of bodhicitta, this aspiration to achieve perfect enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, you must first develop this kind of compassion where you see the torments, the sufferings that beings go through. And in order to generate that, you have to have first generated it for yourself, seeing that you are in this suffering situation and have a strong desire to get out of it.
这个没，超前辈讲，强迫他人家专门写被强求三把，推起写送，个人这边出这把样，团队了光把人是的，人让他看着才信不起，80%信的他妈，俺呢，告诉了俺送个东西人，我就问那种，天天可以东西人，我就问那种，天天年纪，天天俺呢强求个什么信的结果我印象，那种。没呢，俺那产出个什么解释没把人在，他他妈个就查过个军在电影把的，是吧？团队了光把人送是。
So this was the same sort of meaning as when Lord Atisha sort of rebuked the Tibetans, saying, only in Tibet have they found people with a wish for enlightenment who haven't yet found love and compassion. So what this is getting at is that we have to develop these attitudes in stages. First, one needs to think about the suffering of the lower realms and a desire to escape those sufferings. Then thinking about the defects of samsara in general, a desire to be freed from that situation, renunciation for ourselves. Before then, one can generate the compassion for other sentient beings and this wish to gain enlightenment for their sake. So one has to do this sequentially, proceed in stages with these realizations. So this is what it means when it says, at the first, one needs to develop renunciation.
哦呀，但真的，当那种错过军在的上山呢，当那种这边出了，那种超越出来，你才真哦，俺的吃的那些多主当，俺的前面那些多主，说，但真的吃的那些多主得了，俺的他看着人生谈出那个吃了老美吧，一来会被吃的那些多，谁干了？俺的谈出的。谈出跟我送我的，俺的谈出也不告我的，俺的天气我的， 땡디 단조지 땡 토바데 유미룸 이른도 메냐바 아능에와 치와라서 영화 치와서 남징에메다 시비지 취마도 시행한 자마변 발라서 권배 아니 체제 나시에 도바지 두심바래.
So then the second section of this explanation deals with renunciation. And this itself has two parts. First, dealing with how to stop desire for the present life, and then a second section dealing with how to stop desire for future lives. So this comes in the first two verses of first two lines of verse 4, where it says, "Leisure and fortune are hard to find. Life's not long. Think it constantly. Stop desire for this life." So this verse contains the points of the difficulty of obtaining this precious human rebirth, how rare it is and how it doesn't last, and how greatly meaningful this is. This is something that is difficult to find, and when we do find it, we should make it meaningful, as well as the contemplations on death and impermanence, recognizing that our death is definite, that the time of death is uncertain, and that only at the time of death, only Dharma can be of help to us. So these contemplations occur here under this section of how to stop desire for the present life.
Oh yeah. 아니 쾌당 아니 현년자 쾌당 자도바 년자 도바 디다니 세디나샤신들 간데레라서 그래 세나 라미술레자 사바게 아니 도고다 년자 표준서와치 전화량도 아니 세디 디지다 쾌당 자바식 되반디 세디나샤레 셰셰발라
So here, desire for this life, or attachment to the sort of pleasures or good things of this life, is the desire for, say, happiness and fame in this life, where you're saying to yourself, if only I could get more of the good things of life than anyone in the world, the best food, the finest clothes, the biggest name, and all the rest. So having this desire to be famous, or to have people say good things about you, or to have the good things of this life, that desire is what we mean by stopping the desire of this life. So when you have an attachment to being famous, or to being praised, or to getting good things, this is the kind of attachment that one has to sever to engage in a spiritual practice.
Oh yeah. 아니 단다 혼자 샤바게 체제 난제 도바시고 그래 대도바라 아니 간주 거래에서는 다 단조 텐진이야 타와경을 송하다 아니 저바 중을 송이 아니 단조지 최주단 담바 되게 아니 다 가르러서나 대퇴체와 내가라 되는 퇴체와 타두라 되는 퇴체와 거짓말을 진도 퇴체와 내가 모두를 아니 차바르 change 터바도 그냥 댄디 토나 텀니바 아니 타두네네 탐다 타바다 타베시베 고만지 와요나야 아니 댄디 되나 좀니바 어디니 거짓말을 신도 텐셔 와서라고 비랑을 봐 전다 가지지 두고 있나야 아니 거짓말을 신도 좀더 두어봐 이게 아니 텐셔 왔다 대간에 아니 오유관에 이어가와 배관에 이어가와 어디니 가서는 주당 오당 아나 주당 오당 배관에 오유관에 배관에 이어가와 주관에 이어가와라 소가다 대다 루나르바가 마트니 이어가와다 이어와 대야 이어와 땡땡 아니 이런도 매네바 나와 치와다 我남지랑 해와 매바다 치위지 치어카야 매번 삼바我대大了呀아니 지당 해와 용라 태양健康嘅多매바吃了매바 매지 두제 파마제도 외와 치위지 최마도 생각하야 다 매제바 자가 티 내가 치고 그 이제 숨찬에 뒤권도 치 잡고 왔다 제와다 대진이 지전불림 배처럼 해와 매바다 그 이동 그 차량 해와 매바다 시제마시 선자 뉴에 남지랑 와 매바탕 아니 리치 주보다 냠초안에 남지랑 와 매바 세게 남지에 매그 진짜좀 수산내 비요라 최타단 주셔봐 다 제하당 아니 시위지 최마도 생 네 롱제 강거자 매변바 삼바대라 예시 어제동체와 강거자 매변바 삼바대라 어 대제가 아니 시코나 누가 다 잡아 제가 다마 지고라 등근하면 하고 뭐서我第三年说没到吧你3年我第三把了的呢你吃的那些多老的你吃的也通话想过来
So here, in order to stop the attachment to this life, we need to contemplate the two stages known as the great importance of this life of leisure and fortune and the great difficulty of finding it. So here, this involves identifying what these 8 freedoms are, or leisures. The state that we have now is free from these 8 states of not being free, and we have these 10 endowments which create this very meaningful kind of situation. So on the basis of this life, having this support, we are able to accomplish whatever sort of aims we wish to accomplish. It's a greatly meaningful life. In every single moment, we have the potential to do something meaningful. We can work towards gaining the state of liberation or omniscience on the basis of this life. So we should recognize that with every single moment we have this great potential in the life that we have now. And this life that we have is something that is greatly difficult to find. It's extremely difficult to find, and this goes through various points. It's proven by the sort of nature of the life that we have. This is, by its nature, something which is difficult to come across. In terms of the causes that are necessary for gaining this life, it's something that's very difficult to get. And there are sort of classical examples that are used to illustrate how difficult it is to find this life of freedom and endowments. And so this life that we have then is also impermanent, and the fact is that we have to die. So then this contemplation turns to the thoughts of death and recognizing there are various points that come under this topic, but the 3 main sort of determinations that one makes is that death is certain. You come to recognize that you definitely have to die, but the time of death is uncertain. And the fact is that when we die, nothing except for Dharma can be of help to us. So looking at the first point, the fact that death is certain, there's no way to turn around death. We have to face death, and there's no way that that can be reversed. Our lifespans are constantly decreasing, and there's no way that we can increase them. And death is coming, and even while we are alive, we don't have much time to practice the Dharma. So those are the first 3 reasons that go with this first point, that death is certain. The next is that the time of death is uncertain. So the lifespan here in this world is uncertain. There's no way to predict that. The time of death is uncertain because there are so many factors that contribute to our death, and so few that sustain us, that keep us alive. And the time of death is also uncertain because our bodies are extremely fragile. And finally, we get to contemplating that when we die, nothing except for the Dharma will be of help to us. None of our friends or family members can help us. None of our possessions, even our own body, we can't take with us. So we come to determine that death is certain, the time is uncertain, and at the time of death, the only thing that can help us is our practice of Dharma. And so these contemplations help us turn away from the attachment to the affairs of this life.
Oh yeah. 라르타다 최마자나 따지 생활하도 최마자나 따지 최장 아니 최고前前讲确实没着我的我确实没着我的你看这200的现在自己拿些马多百200人是吧人家确实着我了你看说的自己拿些多吧你三姐罗中先把西站给那个了罗中先把西站来讲自己那些呢你确保马人是自己拿些那些呢确保马人考了些呢你快说的这考了些呢也就马人是是吧起没拼做了先把这些那样那也就没叫考他的东西让新东西过过我一张考了些呢也就马人是那对了现在强势没意思让结果真的强势没有他爹的说明对的我说我那些钱呢彻底了现在确保没有考了现在我说没写送把这次印章告诉了彻底了先你告诉你我讲你彻底了先把老百姓过人把的可以拼做了先把老百姓
So in order to really engage in a practice of Dharma, then you have to turn away from the desires of this life. You have to give up on those. And so the fact is that you and I right now never do any spiritual practice. No, worse, the fact that we try and what we do is anything but spiritual practice is all because of our desire for this life. So if we still have desire for this life, no matter what we try to practice, it won't go towards spiritual practice. And from the Sakya text dealing with parting from the 4 attachments is maybe how I translate this. This mind training text says that if you still have attachment to this life, then you're not a practitioner. You're not practicing Dharma. And if you are still attached to the sort of splendors of samsara, then you haven't given rise to renunciation. And the 4 continue saying that if you're still attached to your own aim, you haven't given rise to bodhicitta, and if you're still have attachment or grasping, then you haven't given rise to the view. Those aren't here, but those are the 4. And so here, in order to really engage in practice, you have to turn your mind away from the affairs of this life, and also by seeing the defects of samsara, by recognizing that it's only in the nature of suffering, turn away from that and give rise to renunciation. That's what makes something a spiritual practice.
Oh yeah.确实确马英宝给俺这三점参当，俺这确下马去移民的，俺这看着这身上，确实确马英比三점的，确下马移民的，彻底的汤马当了去个的，彻底的汤呢，俺这确下马当，确实着啊。俺彻底的马当呢，彻底拿钱就往这说呢，俺这确实，俺这看的是看对去过钱家，确马英不大点我说个多，确定去看对去不当，几点的念不懂呀是，去年看到看的最懂不当，俺这我几点给那个7、8年念不懂呀。彻底的当完他几点的彻底训练把你念不懂明白。我确当几点你送这往的没事
No. So the kind of border, the demarcation that separates spiritual practice from that which is not, is and the border that separates real spiritual practice from what is not, is this attitude of having given up on this life. So turning away from the kind of attachment or clinging to this life is what makes something a spiritual practice. So practice in the form of reciting some lines, and the world may somewhere meet. But there is no way that practice in the form of giving up on this life will ever meet the world in the form of happily participating in this life. So there may be times where you meet with worldly things when you're trying to engage in practice, but there's no way to keep sort of a full participation in this life and pretend that one is doing real practice. There's no way you can keep the world and still keep your practice. You have to have turned away from this sort of worldly affairs to engage in a genuine kind of a practice.
Oh yeah. Tell a gone and the shit about Drum Bushiki, and it's in Basila. So go 꼬라 잡아들어 꼬라 쳐봐야 로아 가디야 버르데 대 최시 치스 알아 지마 따와되지나 지마 따와돼 야보지 대라야 최시 치스다 대화자 최시랑 전화 가시서 차당 간된 공부 탐제라 아니 가서래 대례장 안에 최시치 최가를 고치고라서나 안에 최딜려 당하도 고거래 고마 탐제라 대달 소바나 뒤 최지다 이 마셰베 어느 지달 차 휴외 최딜려 통서 최딜려 통 지다 이 마셰베 안에 최지달 주고래 이거를 주어라 안에 최딜려 통하고 그래서 최딜려 통시 제 탐제 최대 전도니와 상대에서 차다 고와라서와 아니다 가서 참해 마동바 최대 나생게 와데 차다 고와 진바 가르쳐와 탐제 최대 나생에서 말 최소 미조와 인자 탐제 최대 세다도 전도니와 상대 대랑이 아니 아자 차도 세당 되바 겨를 세비 군종 거의 주성에서 어디기 다 들었다는 라랑 아자 배와
예.
아니 현장 대선 배와 세당 배와 라서 와기 아니 겨를 세바 그 군종 거의 주성에 된다위 최전나 아니 제일 아니 주 가서를 대화 남다시 마선 바인데 대부 대화면서 뭐 아는 가서도 좋아이다 최체자는 대응해서도 줄왜 리병에서도 상와도 제발매
소파치
가려
락소
락소
제 그런데
아니래서 아래 지금 내치지 로차에서래 첼레 통시스 다다래 제치다시 제와나 첼로 통시스 랜숨지 파는데 숨바이스 야 저버스 가다민 개위 신인 나좀 대배장 상나주 대배다 초라 최시장 최딜레 통 참니제 장제주 고면 시차와래 차와래래 무슨 제외 뒤 좀지 세네 대가 저희 당화기 티충화의 심 티충화 인바라 상代表去数码线吧送
So here, this is what the precious Master Dromdenpa had in mind when he said to this monk, so it makes my heart glad, uncle, to see you walking around this holy place to pay your respects. How much gladder I would be if you did something spiritual. And so Drom kept repeating this to this monk, no matter what sort of practice he was doing, whether he was making prostrations and reciting prayers or meditating and everything else. And so finally, this monk couldn't decide at all what he was supposed to be doing. And so he asked Dromdenpa, well then how am I supposed to practice? What am I supposed to be doing? And the only answer he got was, give up on this life, repeated 3 times and loud. And so here, if one is, even if you're engaging in these practices that are like reciting prayers or making prostrations, no matter what it is, if you haven't turned away from the affairs of this life, then the actions that you're doing are only going towards sort of samsaric causes. So here, Dromdenpa is giving him this advice: give up on this life, make your practice a spiritual practice.
Oh yeah. 텔레 제반이 지된 처제스 다야가 시리를 숨바나네 지된 전반 예단 메데다 대단 메데 년단 메나다 때문에 지된 처제 다그 유메 뭐 관념 저세가다 대화 지나가 동화 주는 메데가 다 지된 처제 제라잖아 대다다 출은되나 안에 세디 셴바게 또그 땀숨对안다 또그 디스보디 또그 땀숨 디스보디 다 로다와시 고그래
So these, if we We can say in a broad way that these 8 the sort of concern with this life can be encapsulated in these 8 worldly concerns. So wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and wanting to have good things, sort of wanting to be have a good name, be well known, or wanting people to speak well of us and so forth. These will come later. But these worldly concerns sort of encapsulate all of the grasping at this life. And these then in turn can be shortened into the 3 concerns of this life: food, clothes, and a big name. Those are the sort of things that we have to give up on in order to renounce the concerns of this life.
Oh yeah. 다 뒤는 또그 땀숨지 나네 아니다 빵가요 가와지 가래래 sana 다 땀대 말이 와 뒤숨지 나네 자 땀디 독시 인데 아니 리빙냐야 나 랭아라 캐와당 아니 쯤바당 아니 검진 파체외장 아니 또라 총 군에 매도 주는 세당 누구 주는 점제 소체바 그래야 아니 총군에 그래도 아니 두자 편보 쳐봐다 아니 개바 잘라자 아니 부구 다자체네 고바 잡고 가냐 아니 고민친게 어디 부구 다자체데 3년 줄라 휴장 셈지 땡니 니 롱비 몇거지 마참 참바 검진 상보시 레스도 레비 아니 담년다 되바다 개와 벤지바당 아니 개론 수준 남자장 대신도 하 개론 수준 남자 남바 타바지래 양바기 아니 미기 텐레기 아니 냐다 되봐 오 텐레기 아니 오다 가서래 담게 담태라가 와도 아니 산이 루와 마보여하래 소템벌 수준 남자다 대신도 루와 마한데
So of these 3, a concern sort of wanting food, clothes, and a big name, or we could say a good reputation. The worst of these 3, by the way, is wanting this reputation. So sages, holy men, and great meditators of the past, even we can say a majority of them, have been able to live without great food, keeping themselves alive on one of those mystical practices where all you eat is some tiny pills or the essence of a flower. And they've been able to live without great clothes too. So these great meditators are able to do without having the normal sort of food or clothing. But this desire to have a good reputation is the most difficult to give up on. And if they're doing this kind of practice in a retreat or in some sort of a meditation retreat, but in the bottom of their hearts they still crave fame, this big name or good reputation, and they dream that all the local people outside are talking about what a holy master meditator they are. So many meditators of the past, scholars, sages, and so forth, have been sort of misled or deceived, betrayed by their own desire to have a good reputation. So this is the most difficult to get rid of.
Oh yeah, 다 되게 세제라. 제 주요 공부 가지고 제 주요 공부 참제 예담지 이게 참제니 아니 고마잖니 이게 지네 수칸나 나라 아니 배 두제 미셔바게 이게 지니 아니 미담 미제바게 검진양 세디 검진 상로 됐어 공화 검진 바 인생바게 로 상로 되니 아니 담그 되게 담그 와서 상왔던데 땀 상부 되는 거 와서 검진 상로 돼 제다 남도 미전 구전지 다천 류 3대 와데 그 생괴 나라 차단 모습라 써와 잠민자 봐 남도 잠민자 전되기 남도 미전 구전지 지지 남라 딜레베 그저 제제 아니 가서다 너를 초를 이만도 초를 탐제 로비 따외칠 대나 체디 남도라 노래 되고 교육에서 오다 인자 남도 그 왕도 마소바 체디 가서 체디 퇴이 그 남도라 대단 도비 치료 아니 뭐 동기 돈 되고 봐 되고 봐 이거 그 내가 돈을 마다나 남도라 돈을 마다나 아니 캐와다 좀 받아 동공기 아니 검진 탐재기 나서 좀 아니 꼭 그거 말했어요 남도 그 왕게 아니 고좀 아니 차다 모성 그 샤완도送的 아니 안도 주tum네 나서 좀 제가 꼭 그거 말했어요
So this is the same idea is expressed by the great Kagyu master Droe Gumbo, and he has said, "They go into seclusion, post a sign on the door, see not a soul. These master contemplators who still hope in this life, they call me the master or the great meditator." So although the person has put their body into a kind of physical isolation and they're putting themselves in retreat, they still have this sort of desire to be famous, to have people think of them as being a great meditator and so forth. And so they are still attached to the affairs of this life. They're still holding this kind of attitude that wishes for the good things of this life. And it continues saying, "And so they fill their minds with hopes and plans and thoughts that come in everything they do. And so their spiritual practice goes to waste, spirited away by bandit locals." So here, if you still have this sort of attitude, this desire that people think well of you, that you get a good reputation as a great meditator by putting yourself into retreat, then all of the spiritual practice you're trying to do goes to waste. So it continues, "Take a spear then, strike it into every thought that comes for this life, and remember, should a single spear not hit the mark, being a sage, saint, scholar, meditator cannot close the door to the three lower realms." So this spear is like the thought that is renouncing from this life. So all of the kind of concerns that we have for this life or for samsara needs to be squarely attacked and gotten rid of in order to actually be engaged in practice. Otherwise, no matter what you're doing, cannot close the door to the three lower realms.
오야 나선도 고메게체 나르와 쳔비 아니 가서라랑 그 제배세다 또그 당신 안지 마다와 지된 최제지 왕게 최제배랑 그 제배 아니 최탐제 체디 아니 체다 전도녀와 상대세 어체디 체디 핀조 야보지와야 전도 디 전도녀와 상대세 전도위 최디 아니 디랑경 아자당 자주 공부 시간에 차도다 세당라 소와 개월에 세봐야 아니 가서래 개월에 세봐기 아니 구중 코엔 주성외시 아니 구중 코엔 주성외 최체념담나 아니 텐다왜 차단고 꾸네 라와게 아니 최지 최고 제나양 아니 대탐제 아니 가성도 규외 아니 리뱅에 손도送왔다 캐메 무슨 미개위래 무슨钱이 아니 대기에 손도 들어왔다 샘게 삼로 차다 맞은 거 왕도 제 왕도送여 아니 최고 제장 안 차다 먹죠 왕도 제와 이거데 아니 리뱅에 손도 들어왔다 캐바 매바 이강에 손도 들어온 전혀 지바인 바 캐바 매송 말이야
So, and the great Ngaripa has also said that all the spiritual practice you've done has turned into some ambition for eminence in this life. This then turns into what we call the origin, a cause for more of the cycle. It increases in you your feelings of pride, jealousy, dislike for some things, and longing for others. So if we are under the control of our afflictions, under the control of ignorance, attachment, and hatred, then whatever sort of practice we are attempting to undertake is only going to be a cause for more of samsara. It's only going to lead to more of that. that. And it will increase these sort of mental afflictions, things like pride and jealousy and our attachment to some things and aversion to others. So what then you thought was spiritual practice actually takes you to the 3 lower realms. It's no different than if you'd gone there by doing bad deeds. So when you've come under the power of your afflictive emotions, and it is your delusion, desire, and hatred that is motivating the actions that you're doing, they only become a cause for going to the lower realms, and no different really than engaging in bad sorts of negative activities.
Oh yeah, that's the Shuanashi Demo Tango. Tena Shinile, Sekala, Jidan Church, Jidan Jamba, Mededa Medina Menada, Demaji, Jidan Churchabo said, Dagi Yume about Guanyam, so that the church go on the massive of Guanyam Sedan. To Chile, but Cornam Dog, Chonjana, Jidan Church, or Alan Jurus. Oh, Annie, to the Jusu Tenanta. Lama Loranem Shutana Terus and Jidan Church on the Masaba, Jidan Church than Travagi, that Gogure is Chisumbatar, that Jidan Church de Ma, that Yugushuna Kawa. Majuna Megawa, Dewachuna Gawa, Majuna Megawa, Ira Chunagawa, Majuna Megawa, Dera Tonga Chunagawa, Mara Chuna Megawa, on Dila Jidan Church Sewa is. Ira Churchabala, Jidan Churchaba, the Konyabachi, Demek Cousin Dewata Medava Kanchun, the 7 Yamba, or that Gosh Gugare, yeah.
So, therefore, if we want to do any kind of spiritual practice, we need to quell, get rid of these 8 worldly thoughts. We must stand neutral, free of both members of each of its 4 pairs. So we need to sort of push down these 8 worldly concerns. And these 8 worldly concerns are the name that we give to these emotions of being happy when we get something, being unhappy when we don't, being happy when we feel good, being unhappy when we don't feel good, being happy when we become well known or have a good reputation, and being unhappy when we don't, being happy when someone speaks well of us, and being unhappy when someone speaks ill of us. So if we come under the control of these 8 worldly concerns, then whatever sort of practice we are trying to do will not become a spiritual practice. So it's important that we sort of neutralize or get rid of these 8 worldly concerns as they are listed here, in order that we not be just contributing to continuing to cycle.
Oh yeah, that's it. Crazy don't come so young, church about that didn't church at a Guanyan by your girls. That care what down, Jumba down, and the church don't be low down. I know Gomching country in a young, and the didn't church at and dready, and the church some more children, Chugu Chajang, and the church of Motor in Boya Maris. They never Java Grazambaki, Loma, Yangon Bishan, church of a chumbo in Bemi. Kansa de Toba Chimbo, Toba Chimbo Togores, or Tojan Toba Gilekiwa Gogores, Casore, Chijudi Toba Chimbo in Kansa de la Tignoli Menetigo Marina, Kansa de Toba Chimbo Togo, Chugela, and Toba Chimbo, and Casore. Zorumbare, what did it take? A commissaries, Chugala, Tariwa, Mambo Chene, Kansala Tendegi, and the Tobatan Meba, Chimiri, Mambo Tong. Choosing down to son, Lala Mideva Tezo, and it took them to son, and it rang Lala Mideva Tezo, and it done Nanji Dumba Dachaba, Maria Kana Dumba de. Similar, and it's some you can't remember the Chatang go on to someone that some you can't remember the Nanju Dumba the Keme. Oh, similar church chin, only 최주 마제바스 샘단 체단 추마제바스 잠바단 추마제바 최단 가사게 파나 하와 미션와 좀 체데 바르 되니바 당을 보지 하와 동바 미션와 좀 체 최로의 체마신이세 로와기 체마신 칼라이 체레체와티 아니 취 아니 거대 마주바 라메 세야.
So these 8 worldly concerns are also expressed in the letter to a friend, and they're the same ones articulated there. And this is also in the quote by Ling Reba. And so it doesn't matter then who you are, whether you're some great sage or saint or master or meditator, no matter how profound the practice you imagine you're doing, it is all a hollow sham if it's mixed up with the 8 worldly thoughts. So we find this expressed in the words of Yang Gumba, a disciple of the victorious Gutsangpa. So he says, it doesn't do any good that the teaching is the holy and secret great completion. The person himself has to become holy and secret, greatly complete. So here, if we have come under the sort of the concerns of this life, come under the control of our attachment, ignorance, or hatred, and are trying to do a spiritual practice, that will never become spiritual, no matter whether the teaching is something as high and precious as the great completion or great perfection. We see a whole pack of cases where the person describes, where the way a person describes his spiritual practice, it would buy a whole herd of horses, but the person himself isn't worth a dog. Religion that's all words and never gets put into daily practice is all the same as some talk a parrot's been taught to squawk. The person and the practice are miles apart. His mind and his religion never quite mix into one. There's lumps of flour that never dissolve in the batter. Babbling on about spiritual practice and never letting it sink in, leaving it to bob around on the surface like some uncooperative vegetables in a soup, is missing the whole point of spiritual practice. So it's no different if we try to say that we're doing something, some high spiritual practice, like saying some prayers or something, yet our mind is distracted away or is motivated by ignorance, desire, or hatred, then this practice doesn't really become a spiritual practice. It's like these examples of that have been given of like dough not being mixed together, or these uncooperative vegetables on top of a soup. So the most important thing is to, I tell you all, what I teach is the crux of all practice is to give up on this life.
Oh yeah, that didn't. And say loyal don't want to be to the shower, you know, you share some but I said, say the church at Le Madonna, the then church at Le Madonna, church on your pasha. Nason could give what I mean, and a Cuba, a calculation, Nason could give and you give what the Cuba, and a Gala Cabaret. And church of a lot of Quantishabana, the then church at Guanya Bachitan. Say le don't we, and you got them be. 这乐当然名啊，噶咱普诺就养是两个的，噶咱普诺就，大家看的人生他们都没听过的，普诺就写，但不写是，你多些什么事，你平常做什么的就认识呀，大家这个没听过的。
No. So here then, if a person fails to stand free of the 8 worldly thoughts for this life, he will find it hard to shut the doors to a birth in the realms of misery, much less to do something that's a spiritual practice. So if you fail to sort of push down these 8 worldly thoughts or get rid of them, then it will be hard to even close the doors towards going to a rebirth in the lower realms, much less actually trying to engage in a spiritual practice. So to do such a practice, you must take up the instruction called the 10 Ultimate Riches, which is a teaching of the masters, we usually call them Kadampas, for quelling the 8 worldly thoughts and giving up on life. And so these will come in the explanation of the commentary, but these 10 Ultimate Riches include what are called the 4 aims, the 3 diamonds, the 3 of being thrown out, of reaching and attaining.
Oh yeah. puno ju nyamse lege puno ju she deba shi do chi sum punya to sum de ju yin deba shi ni da lo pu de che la deba ani che che na ani da ba ka so de ji du ba jo bo ani ba ba ka so ram to ge tam so ba jo cha ni zhang bu cha wa zhe ji yin na yang ani chi bu zhang la deba去不长了带你，你长不掐你，你才个泡你，洗我这就一那样你长不洗了对吧？你洗不的错不干不了对吧的，洗不你错不干不那了，你洗我的错不干不了对吧的对吧洗钱呀。
So these 10 ultimate riches then begin with the 4 aims. And so the first is aiming your mind ultimately to practice. So by turning away from the things of this life, you turn to wanting to practice only. So all of the things that one might have, all of the food, clothing, the good name, and so forth, you recognize that they won't be of help to you, and you aim your mind to do practice. And then aiming your practice ultimately to the beggar is saying, well, even if I have to become impoverished and lose those things that I have now, I will do so in order to be able to practice. So you aim, as it says here, aiming your practice ultimately to the beggar. And the next is aiming the beggar ultimately to death. And that's thinking that, well, if I become this beggar and I I don't have lots of possessions or food and so forth, I might die. You have that thought arise, and then the thought is, well, even if I die, I'm going to engage in this practice. And the last is, even if one has to die sort of without anyone even knowing about it, that's okay. You'll continue to practice. And so that's what's meant by aiming death ultimately to some dusty ravine.
Yeah, that's the Dharana Java Yongu the Nama Shisha, Kang, Lubuchela Debani. 아니 루부치를 때반에 달에 예바 가신是吧 얘나 전체에 다조지 대상보联系 좀 예반디 이름부 대양 아니 이름도 많이 봐 치왕의 신 다다지 나시잖니 남지량과 매바 시위체양 안에 답이 치고 코나 마도 최대 연구 년자 안에 반조 lon지 치담여장 안에 중세자 펜바매바 시위제 치마도 상강그 잠매바 안에 삼네 안에 체체바데 루부치를 때바기 텐테제
No. So these will be explained here in the commentary. So the first here is aiming your mind ultimately to practice. And this means to practice Dharma with the thought that this time I've been able to obtain a good human body and circumstances. This is something that's extremely rare to find, and it's something that's incredibly valuable. So we have at the present this situation with all of the sort of freedom and endowment we need to be able to practice. And so this is the one and only time I will have such a life. It will not be here long. So recognizing that death is certain, and it is absolutely sure that I will die, and I have no way of knowing when my death will come. So again, thinking about the fact that death is uncertain, the time of death is uncertain, and when I die, only this holy spiritual practice will be of any use to me. All of the things and honors I've gathered in this life, every bit of fame I've gained, everything else of the money and possessions I may have with me will not be of slightest help to me. So here, this is the sort of contemplations that death is certain, the time of death is uncertain, and that practicing Dharma is the only thing that helps at the time of death.
Oh yeah, 평소 처와정 위치도 대단 마주바라 최체나 아니 최지 튕년 최제바 그 튕년장 매바 아니 장부 참명아 냠나 아니 되는지 삼로 코나 내 최지치도 까와제네 장부 채나야 채 세고는 가서 너무 자와 잠지 아니 배랑 리 초라 채네 아니 배 가서 세미와 매바 아니 체누바지 체베드문바지 저거 세거 체도 아니 셈베 가서래 이와 매바 아니 체 중요하지 저거 양바데 아니 초보 장을 대바데
No. So then next is aiming your practice ultimately to the beggar. And so the thought behind this is as follows. So suppose you have this thought, well, now if I stop trying to do what it takes to live well in this life so I can do my Dharma practice, I'm afraid I won't even find the bare necessities for doing practice. I'll become a beggar. So if one has this doubt thinking about doing practice, then one should think in this way: I will undertake any hardship for my practice, and if it means I have to become a mere beggar, then let me become a beggar. I will find a way to do my practice, even if I have to live on lousy scraps of food that I beg off others, and wear any old clothes they give me. So one might have this doubt like, well, what if I can't find the things that I need to practice? And this is turning away from that concern, saying that even if I have to become a beggar, I will engage in my practice.
Oh yeah, that didn't不去了的，全部涨了的，涨不起了，对吧？的呢，当然加了全部就马上完了，俺那他到涨不钱呢，去住过钱呢呀，俺那没事人不的，超过马人，伢们没事样，俺那超到没度，俺那多个没把希望也把去穷呢。我在这一穷呢，俺才让俺们忙不了，俺那缺几天都少到嘛用我这是。是吧？才让我们叫忙不起让我这缺几天就少当嘛用我这，他这缺住呢，俺那边可是三个就碰的新的系统那样，俺那快接不当，快接，咱那全部当张不你七句音班抓完了，全部用句团队。接了3年，全部用几天都3年去我来，去了搞我家呢，去请我的，俺那天全部主办呢，去几天都，俺那查是西那样的，俺那到底咱们西那样，西样都，俺那去老没到我的，俺那西部按差不干不了对吧？呀。
No. So then here, aiming the beggar ultimately to death means, again, not ever giving up on your practice. So suppose you think to yourself as follows: so I try to do some practice and I turn into a beggar because I haven't taken the time to collect even the smallest material thing. But then I won't even have what it takes to sustain this human life. I'm afraid someday I'll die without enough food, without enough clothes. So this is the kind of doubt that arises in one's head, and instead of that, one should think like this: in all my many previous lives, I've never given up my life for the sake of my practice. If I can die this one time trying to practice, I might make up for it. So in all of our past lives, we haven't ever committed to the practice in such a way that we are even willing to die for it. And anyway, we are all going to die the same. Whether you're rich or whether you're a poor beggar, everyone has to die. So rich people, to get rich, have collected a lot of bad deeds and die with them. I, on the other hand, will accomplish something of very great meaning if I die from the hardships of trying to practice. So here, recognizing that death is certain and death equally comes to all, one makes this commitment to accomplish one's practice no matter what sort of hardships one might incur. So if for my practice I freeze to death, let me freeze. If for this I starve, let me starve.
我呀，他这个代表什么的青少去，是吧？都是西那样，西洋的去人没多少人，那天天西部初步干部了代表天人，俺那上了有些店里面呢，有些店里面我真，俺那上拿我当，给我当。啊，特别那个了，有那个有些姑姑这些，你去亲戚了呀，去亲戚了要钱给他，啊，若这些亲戚了呀，你光说的，那姑姑人伢们，哎呦。若这些亲戚了呀，过年把样，自己拼做来想把的，是吧？自己拼做来想把人，让你老改把都，俺那财人不得把给，俺那。你要带人买吧， 라니 로가게 봐도 체증부 되바게 와 때네 매배 대회 아니 치 주문에 라라 땅게 매봐 초복감be 나도 아니 치시와 나신 아니 로라 부잡자로 냠도 가라야 맞아봐 아니 에비르도 치 주바데 어따데 시부 초복감을 담바데
So that was then the third aim, aiming the beggar ultimately to death. And so the fourth of these is aiming your death ultimately to some dusty ravine. So suppose you're thinking like this, that suppose you think to yourself, but there are certain things that I need from now up until the time I'm going to die. If I don't have any money at all, how am I going to get someone to help me when I'm sick? Who will attend to me in my old age? Who will be there at my deathbed, and who will take care of things after I die? Who will take the body away and all the rest? So all of these thoughts are still having a kind of attachment to one's own life and the good things of this life. So in order to reverse that, we think that there's no way at all you can be sure that you'll even live long enough to reach old age. We have no certainty about when we are going to die. So recognizing this, it's better to go to some lonely mountain retreat and give up attachment to anything at all and think to yourself, now I'm going to practice, and I don't care if I die like some stray dog in a dusty ravine with no one to look after me and maggots crawling all over the corpse. So here one is completely giving up attachment to anything in this life and saying that and aiming even at death not to have some sense of attachment to this life.
Oh yeah, that is so. I know 도치 숨보대 도치 숨보대에서다 태면 도치 올랐다 태면 도치 제라시 이시 도치란다 자조 저가라 태면 도치 올랐다 세대 다 태면 도치 올랐다 와네 랑게 대달레 따네 최주발라 아니 랑게 최주발라 하마다 년제 자조라 소와 시점기 쇼장세 아니 다 최주바들 파 가자체니 시점 쇼장 아니 쇼도 메두바라 니시这种 切와应当找我 남당 양에다 제신 미치만 자리 리장 이 도시다 주와메 바베 오다란 그 삼다 주와 이 도시다 미주와 동섬다 차선 메바 아니 엠비르도 소네 아니 최남다 남다체바시고 그래 세테테 테메도제데
So then come the three diamonds or three vajras, depending on how you translate. So the first is sending the uncatchable diamond ahead of you. So here, this means that you may be able to give up on life as described above and start to try your practice and try to start your practice. But then your parents and other family, your friends, and all the rest will try to catch you and bring you back. So you should make yourself uncatchable. Keep your mind as firm and unchangeable as a diamond, even if you have to leave behind your most beloved family and friends, those close to you as the heart in your breast, standing with tears in their eyes from the pain. Leave, go to some lonely mountain hermitage without any regrets, without any attachments. Stay there and devote yourself to the purest of practice. So one should have this attitude of being firm and unchanging in one's determination to go and engage in practice, to have this strong sense of purpose such that you aren't going to change your mind from any of the feelings that your friends or family might have.
Oh yeah, that is tremendously jealous about me. And that rangi chele tane drawana. 아니 미想봐 저기 코 아니 배라라 고왔다니 코 장점 타제를 세워서 장보다 아니 배 참봐 미타제들을 이스러와서 아니 년매 시체와다 참여 간지 제장 아니 상보 사다보를 세나라 야보를 세나래 냠발 아니 제다보를 세나야래 강이 세나야 아니 쳐봤잖아 매봐 아니 체디 자식이 아니 가서로 무슨 쳐봐니 아니 자식이 무슨이 아니란 거 쳐봤더니 내가 망보기 전에다 체주배 파제 인도 냠도 아니 내 당와시 고그래
So then the second Vajra or diamond is laying the unabashable diamond behind you. So here, suppose you think, okay, I've given up on this life and I'm going to leave all of it behind. And then you think, well, people will despise me. People will think badly of me. They'll condemn me and say things like, now he's nothing but a useless wandering beggar. And so you need to, no matter what people might say, whatever sort of bad words or scorn, contempt they might have for you, you should have an attitude that says, well, whatever they say, I must give up on all of this. And think to yourself, if they say I'm as pure as a god, that's fine. If they say I'm as evil as a devil, that's fine too. It doesn't make a difference to me. Trying to keep up a good image with friends who are all devoted to this life can lead to a great many problems and act as a great obstacle to keeping spiritual practice. So if one wants to really engage in spiritual practice, you need to have this attitude of leaving aside whatever other people might say and be devoted to one's spiritual practice, recognizing that those worldly entanglements act as an obstacle to genuine practice of Dharma.
oi ta tini isi doje randa droba de ane embe na so rang chidar ane ta druba cheba tamje ba tela namya minda wa ane ni mo me ba ge ane cheji chasha tamje be den do ban de yo dina ge chasha tamje dan do ban de ane chuji samba tembo ge ane chedan druwa nya ba cheba de rang chedan ane druwa nya ba cheba de 어디다 이시도지란다 drobatche.
So then the third diamond or vajra is keeping the wisdom diamond at your side. And this means never transgressing the pledge you have made to yourself. So you've made this pledge to engage in practice, and abandoning, in order to do that, one is abandoning all of the sort of concerns, affairs of this life, all of those actions which don't have any meaning or essence to them. So abandon forever all the absolutely meaningless actions you do out of desire for this life. Keep your mind in the spiritual firmly and make your life and your practice one and the same. So this is referring to having a really firm commitment to doing the practice of this life, such that you don't stray into these meaningless actions.
Oh yeah, that's it. 다 비니 토스면 제대 임바임바래. 나 되네 가서래서나 비니 토스가 나네. 아니 담 미라나 표반이 미차나 표반이 디나게 편조란 다다른 때네 체디 되니지 아니 투매 수당 믿음바 아니 녀비 접다를 체디 녀비 접다를 체디 미라나 표바이 미차나 표바이 미라나 표 치자도 이반이 또가 따선라 총구루 치지셔도 아니 조금다 아니 류랑아도 치점 총양 아니 배텔라 세바 관니 센서바 쳐바테 센쳐바 쳐바테 치자도 냐바체 라다 토바니 임비네서 지대지 차샤 탐제 방데 차샤 탐제 별려 따데 주바 타르 깨와나 아니 가서래 사유양 사 산제지 고만 체들라 토바 인자 아니 라다도 예바 야
So then finally come the last three of these, which are in short being thrown out, reaching and attaining. And so the first of these is being thrown out from the ranks of men. So it is like this. You will start to see that desiring the good things of this present life is your real enemy. So once you have that kind of an outlook on life, your whole outlook will then start to clash with the outlook other men have, high or low, who all nonetheless strive for this life's happiness. To them, you are acting like a madman, and so you will be thrown out from the ranks of men who live for this life. So the first is referring to turning away from the affairs of this life, such that you're kind of thrown out or exiled from the ranks of normal people and their desires. And the second is reaching the ranks of dogs. And this means that you live your life without any great food or clothes or reputation. For the sake of your practice, you endure whatever comes to you in the way of hunger, thirst, or tiredness. So here, this means that once you've given up on any sort of attachment to food, clothing, or reputation, you then are able to bear with, to endure whatever sort of difficulties that you may come across. And finally, attaining the ranks of gods starts with going to some secluded place and giving up on all the normal activities of the world. And in this very life, if you strive in your practice, you're able to reach the state of Buddhahood, the God of gods. So by in this way going to a secluded place and devoting yourself to practice, you are able to achieve this God of God kind of state, that of Buddhahood.
Oh yeah, that being a total tether, that le dani, Quantisha Nasi, or Teta le dani, che drumna, Tambor Sonde, and Muki Sionia be Tobachama Goba, Tobachama Go. Jidemba Tone Sisijans, Jidemba Namani Torilla, she was a Sijan, Shua Torilla, she was a tenant Mrs. Shua Torilla, she was a tenant Mrs. Temba Tujan, Omato, San gave it. And you could you truly give a shiva, say, college, and Jawa Trugi, and it gave a shivi, give a shiji, and it's son of Gilhapo Livanams. Or Shiji, and it's son of Hapo Livateta, and it to be Jenju, Nam Toy Tunjan to Moavata. I told you 10 years to Moavata. Then be Jesu Jubagi, and it Jenju Tetaki, and it should be Tinja to Omawan Sabata. Ninja Bergado, Sanjaki, 2 GB Gaso, Ne Dambala, Chiomi, Chogomi, Sushi Chawayang, Ne Dambala Junior, Chogomi, Sushi Chawayang, Sadu Sabashi Majunayang. Majuna, Sadun Korang Sambashi Majuna, Dag Sanje Lube, Da Sanje Lube, Sanje Madover Jiji Sumbatas. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So then, if you have given up on the affairs of this life and you've decided to practice in this way that's just been described, you don't need to fear that you'll become a kind of poor beggar and starve to death. While it is possible for a worldly person to die of hunger, it is absolutely impossible for a religious practitioner to do so, for someone who's practicing the Dharma. And this is because our compassionate teacher, the Buddha, when he reached the state of total enlightenment, still had merit enough from his past deeds to go and take some 60,000 births as a wheel-turning emperor, so one of these incredibly powerful beings who rules the world. So instead of using that merit to take rebirths like that, the Buddha took the fantastic power of these deeds and dedicated it to the food and other necessities that all his future followers might require. So in this sutra, the White Lotus Sutra on Compassion, we hear this oath from the Buddha as he first commits himself to reaching enlightenment for the sake of living kind. And so he says here then, in the days when my teachings spread in the world, any man who wears so much as 4 inches of the saffron robe shall find food and drink to his heart's desire. If he does not, then I shall have cheated the state of Buddhahood, and then I may lose my Buddhahood. So here, this is articulating that if one is a genuine practitioner, one will not need to worry for food and clothing.
Oh yeah, ane moambana, ane jidana muga chunde. Jidana mugu chunde, ane mudi chekandang, ane zamba chekangla, zamba chekangi, ane rimbala mudi chekang, ane baga jogoyagi, mudi chekanda, zamba chekang jegiwi tui chunga inayang, tembi jenju na choya mibomba sumbata. 亲辈就他们家跟生命定度新没讲是啊，亲辈就干什么个定度新没讲，没有都去完了，主要旁边门就了，是前面个路上没办，安尼多的了送过来是啊。
So the Buddha also says that in the future days there will become this time of famine, wherein you have to pay a box of pearls in order to buy a box of flour. So in this incredible time of famine, not even in that situation will a follower of the teacher ever want for life's necessities. So even at this time of great famine, those who are genuine practitioners cannot want for anything. And finally, Lord Buddha has stated that householders, each and every one, may plow their crops on a fingernail. So imagining a time where there's famine in the world and so little that householders are plowing their crops on the size of a fingernail. But those who've left their homes for me will never want for necessities.
哦，些多的了，说是吃那东西，那东西做的，到课堂那种考的下吧，那些，俺这刚说的几天缺节个想法，顶上缺节就想法的来通过来是，这通呢，有些他们家当呢。那这当然，有些他们家当然长不起，长不行而没个的是，长不起，有些他们家媳妇当然让你长不行而没个的。俺那问题他们忙不，菜落，菜那汤的菜了，加上加上加速汤，并且落上一些是抓不再不赢，是吧？我听你看想来千把没把再不赢，咸阳大家个地方土地建议科举及加速办的差不多穷啊当。俺那家是希望来当，说去办的二弟是所长，家是办的差不多穷。这种我前面讲，我们等你真把多少年吧，没7万责任下的，俺那就前面样个个性，可他把他们家怎么来，没把俺那查查了习惯当，哦。对起，俺那见到我们谁不当，俺那大先生七度长的点点学长，俺那电马这见到了马别把，哦，他把太太给俺那出于高度长，少年赚了3，出于高度长3，少年赚了电把长，就把路再把说，俺那我去我高达比，俺那碰到几天，俺那天气下些再把的是，
So when we say or talk about giving up on this life, the main thing that one is turning away from, that one is giving up, are these 8 worldly concerns. These concerns with the pleasures of this life and so forth, as well as having attachment towards food, clothing, and one's reputation. And so giving up these thoughts doesn't necessarily mean that you have to throw away all your material possessions and become a beggar. There are examples of teachers in the past, such as the 7th Dalai Lama Kelsang Gyatso and the Panchen Lama Losang Yeshe, who had incredible wealth and were real practitioners. And then there is, on the other hand, the examples of like our own teacher, the compassionate Buddha, who could have had the kingdom of a world emperor but gave it up and left the home life. And the princes Shantideva and Atisha as well relinquished all of that to go practice the spiritual life. The mighty Lord Tsongkhapa as well, acting on the instructions of Manjushri, left behind close to 1,000 learned students with tears in their eyes and everything else he had to go into isolation with but a few hand-picked disciples, the followers known as the Purest 8. And at that time as well, the Emperor of China dispatched a letter with his golden seal carried forth by Atashin and other high officials inviting Lord Tsongkhapa to come to their court, but they couldn't induce him with that kind of an offer. He had no attachment to these sorts of things. So these high beings lived only off their own asceticism and whatever food someone might offer. They spent their days striving to perfect their practice, and in such activities led a way of life that really followed the meaning of these 10 ultimate riches, the teaching of Atisha as well as the Kadampa masters.
Oh yeah, that is it. I know chechi luji la san jabage. I know jawa ensa wa chombo. Chechi la sonju go compagnie be ensa chombe shane jang. 원디지 멜라라와서 원지 아니 대스바가 멜라라와다 지지 멜라라와다 다디지 로산 텐주 자로산 텐주 콘란소래 다디지 로산 텐주라스 차제지 세고 많이 봐 차지 아니 거당 아니 차도 아니 리처와게 아니 세고다 마도바 농업이 좀봐 농업이 좀봐 거와메스 노중업을 아니 좀봐 샤와 거와메 세질라 산제 주발라 아니 텐지 쪄라 레체네서 저바 가르서나 차제지 세고 내마 아니 소자나 마대니 아니 심차단 그 와도 마송와 엠베네서 아니 단절라 님불래 봐시 영화 쇼 채네다 에서 집에 들수는 바래 세지 산제 가서 언제지 멜라라바다 다되지 로산 텐줄라 차제지 세고 마도바 농업이 좀바 거와메 세지라 산제 주발라 텐지 쪄라 저바 텐질라 내네 차단 뱀비 에네서 단절 님불래 봐쇼
No. So, there are these songs of experience from many of these masters who have given up on this life. The great Victor Insapa, who achieved Buddhahood in this one human life, in this one man's body, said this. Milarepa of days gone by, so the masters like Milarepa of the past, as well as Losang Dundrup in our times, so a practitioner contemporary with Insapa, had no need for keeping a single thing beyond today's food and the clothes they wore. So they had no need to accumulate any kind of wealth or fortune. They didn't need to stockpile food or anything like that. And so here he continues saying, make the most of your leisure and fortune in isolation from like and dislike. Live life well. Follow this way. Reach enlightenment in this one life. So isolating oneself from these attitudes of attachment to some things or aversion to others, and getting rid of all of those kinds of mental afflictions is the way to make the most of this leisure and fortune. And so he's encouraging others to live well, follow this example of these masters of the past, and in this way reach enlightenment in this one life.
Oh yeah, tadi jela ane najo jawanje melarabe shane jang punye 사주 차사나 부우서나 아니 제와게 아니 배니 부인네 사주 이네 아니 최찬되지 상고연나 아 대바띵네 제와지 고그래서 대바시 띵네 제와나 최래 대바시 띵네 제와나 아니 세디 핀조랍니다 세디라 치미미다나 세디 세디 핀조랍니다 치미미다나 내말은 같이 장와나 덴바를 아니 나이 제수 장와나 아니 년뒤 뒤지 쇼모이랑게 비인당에 년이 되了说대다 아니 대다 그 최了다시 쳐봐인바 년뒤 뒤지 쇼대인 된다와데 된을 쇼대와데 된요 마냥 아니 세지 쳐봐줘봐 세지 쳐봐줘봐 예 최了파제치가 세노 뒤지 요모인 세다 놀아서 뒤지 소와인 대신에는 아니 진짜 봉세 대신 남발에 남이 대다라 아니 산로 대다라 아니 차바 봉고래서 대신 안로 진짜 봉세 된 뒤지 샤바인 된 뒤지 샤바인 아니 대다게 아니 코라 청와인 바인 바 청왕에서 샤바 통서 신로 뒤지 부모인 러신 초 뒤지 부모인 루왕에서 다시 콘센치스 다시치스 파유 뒤지 제라인 타발가가 니도체 아니 가라 라 탐자샤나 dro거나 뒤타다샤나 된전라세 몽반에 탐자샤나 12채나 아니 다페 탐자샤나 dro고 그래세 12채나 라 탐자샤나 dro거나 뒤타다나샤나 된다 전부 된다된 바양 용 그래세 뒤타다나샤나 안테다게 왕도 마상와 된다된 바용 그래세 뒤타다샤나 된전라 규리지 토요 지장 개세 사자신이 풍부대 규밀리단 자와대 몽바나 안에 텐자와대 가서 제니 치와티스나 뒤타다 땡데 드나레서 다디 내가서 땡데 드나레 셈차고 지장 푸르 뒤타다나 남반자나레
So then the great master of all master meditators, Milarepa, said here too, if in your heart you wish to keep the holy practice, son, and so he's referring to with sort of an affection to whoever is reading this, within the very depths of it, then find this thing first, faith. So at the beginning, we need to try to cultivate a strong faith that comes from the depths of our heart, a really strong faith in this. And once one has generated that faith, never turn and look back once again upon this life. If in truth you'll follow after me, your loved ones turn to demons, hold you back. Do not think them true, cut all ties. So one comes to see those that you have attachment to as being like demons who will be holding you back. So you shouldn't think that they are truly your friends, and you should cut ties with them. Food and money are the demon's advance guard. The closer, the worse. Give up all want for them. The objects of the senses are the demon's snare. They will entrap me. Stop your craving for them. Your young love is the daughter of the demons. She will mislead me, so be on your guard. The place you grew up, your homeland, is the demon's prison. Hard to free yourself from. Flee it quick. So here, all of the times where it says demon, sometimes we see this translated as Mara as well, the Sanskrit word. So all of these things we should come to see as being like demons and turn away from them. So in the future, you will have to leave it all behind and go on later. So why not make it meaningful and leave it all right now? It will fall down one day anyway, this mannequin apparition. Better to use this body now. Get off to a good start. So the contaminated aggregates that we have now are like an apparition, are something that will fall apart. They are not stable. So in this situation that we are in now, we should better to get off to a start to spiritual practice rather than waiting for something.
Oh yeah, that is inside that Baji Shaman. Oh, Tata Tende Trina, Lessem Chago Chijang, Purse, Tatana Nambanjanale, Mingase, Teson Yanjana, Puchela, Laga Chichi, Puchela, Haji Gawa, yes, and then that you all keep on Yanjim Misoshins, so keep on the Ani Rangan and Yeduna Mashiva Masowa. Rala dubo chuna ya duban drai mishowa ani riji diru chini na ane na jo saba zowa yin se
So then the last quotation ends, better to use this body now, get off to a good, quick start. The skittish bird of mind will fly away from the corpse one day. Better now to soar across some wide expanse of sky. If you listen and act upon this one man's words of mine, then the grace to keep the holy practice, my boy, is yours. So here it's sort of an exhortation to us to listen to these words and engage in sincere practice. Milarepa has also said in another quotation, no way my loved ones know I'm glad, no way my enemies know I'm sad. If I can die here in this cave, my hermit's wishes have come true. So without having any sort of attachment to loved ones, wanting them to know that you're happy, or any sort of worry that your enemies might know you're unhappy, if you can die here without any of that, that would be a hermit's wish come true.
So
we'll stop there for today. This quotation is going to keep going for a while. Ji Eden Bari Rogana Dakshingla Jeparsho Dagi Chakdang Monsum Gewe Yu Tranyan Barsum Ludang Long Juje Pa Me Bar Buagi Lekshene Tuksum Ram Sadrowar Jenki Lop Idam Gururat Mandala Kamni Atayami